Minnesota is one of the best places to live in the entire country.
Yeah, and now U.S. News and World Reports tells us, yes, we are.
Northern and western Minnesota is home to breathtaking scenery and an aesthetic layout that's only seen in a few places in the world. Stepping into the state gives you a taste of two different landscapes, the tranquil forest and the bustling city center. Yet, amid all of this natural beauty, no one wants to live in northern and western Minnesota. Why do people avoid settling down in this amazing state? Could there be something unpleasant lurking behind the external beauty of this terrain? Join us as we investigate why northern and western Minnesota have become uninhabited. Number 1. Why everyone refuses. Living in northern and western Minnesota. The state of Minnesota has such an appealing outlook that it serves as a tourist center for foreigners looking for a vacation in the United States. The forests are lush with green vegetation that is pleasing to the eye. Everywhere your eye rests, you behold the hidden art behind the flowers and trees in the woods. Outside the forests, you're greeted with the impressive layout of the city, bubbling with life and commerce. The remaining people in the state are so engrossed with making a living and getting their daily bread out of the market share flowing in the natural landscape. A sweeping look over the horizon reveals well-proportioned hills gracing the corners of the state. It's surprising, therefore, when we observe that northern and western Minnesota are some of the most sparsely populated areas of the state and in the United States at large. Nobody wants to settle down in this region, and it has remained a puzzling concern for onlookers and the government. Many people have speculated on lots of reasons why it is so, saying it could be the harsh winter conditions or the unfavorable economic playing ground of the state. No one knows for sure, but whatever it is, people are refusing to live in northern and western Minnesota. They'd rather pitch their tent in some other less attractive but bubbly area. And there seems to be a good reason for that. These reasons are not very visible at first, but when you dig deep a little, you'll discover why no one desires to settle in northern and western Minnesota. One of the reasons has to do with their historical ancestry. Number 2, settlement patterns of native Minnesota tribes. The story of how the ancient Minnesota tribes settled in the land gives a clue on why the state's population is this way. It boils down to the early history of the region before it became the state of Minnesota we know today. Looking back at the historical timelines of Minnesota, you'll discover that the land was once inhabited by Native American tribes. The two primary tribes that resided in this land were the Ojibwe and Dakota tribes. The Ojibwe occupied the north and east of the land, while Dakota took over the south and west region. Both of these distinct tribes were spread across the region as they intermingled with each other in a harmonious relationship. Living in ancient Minnesota was a delight as they worked together in harnessing the goodies of the land through farming and its natural resources. Between Ojibwe and Dakota, the Dakota people have been here the longest. Aaron Griffin, a social anthropologist and member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota, says, "We are told that we were brought here to this land from the stars, to the places where the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers meet. This meeting point is known as Badoti, our place of Genesis, and we recognize Badote as the center of the earth and all things. It was from this place of origin that the Dakota population spread to cover entire lands in the upper Midwest, including present-day Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, and the eastern regions of Montana and Wyoming. The Ojibwe, on the other hand, arrived at the western areas of the Great Lakes in the mid-1600s, and they shared many similarities with the tribe of Dakota. Though they spoke a language different from Dakota, they were sibling descendants of the woodland cultures. Around 1700, the Ojibwe began settling down in northern Minnesota. They searched for a land where food would grow on water according to an ancient prophecy they received. This prophecy made them move from one region of ancient Minnesota to the other, searching for this farm produce that would grow on water until they finally found it in northern Minnesota. It was there that they stumbled upon wild rice, a food that grows on water, and they knew they'd reached the promised land. Everything continued to go well until the 19th century when the European settlers arrived. And since then, there has been a major shift in the demographic outlook of the region. The most period of settlement took place in the 1880s, because it was a season when homesteaders trooped into the western and southwestern regions of ancient Minnesota, as they were enticed by the prospect of lands and opportunities. Due to the promise of a better life, ancient Minnesota witnessed a surge of foreign settlers in their land, which was partly because of the westward expansion movement taking place across the United States. The natural resources found in Minnesota attracted a horde of immigrants who deemed it wise to pitch their tents in the land. As the state began to develop, the southeastern part, which includes the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, began to rise as the center of urban development. The southeastern part became the hub of commercial activities in Minnesota. One prime example of this was St. Anthony in Minneapolis, as it became the heart of flour milling in the state, capitalizing on the power of the Mississippi River. Everyone looking for a place to permanently settle took note of this industrial development, since it meant that the economy would flourish and create an atmosphere conducive to private businesses. More and more immigrants moved to Minnesota, causing a surge in commercial and urban growth. The Twin Cities were positioned strategically along major transportation routes, making for easy access to the commercial hub of the state. Businesses boomed and quickly became the main reason why southeastern Minnesota transformed from a country with native tribes to an urban state. It was as if this region left the remaining parts of the state behind and caught up to the industrial age going on in the world at that time. Southeastern Minnesota transformed so much that traveling from there to northern and western Minnesota will see you experiencing a steep drop in urban development. In stark contrast to the southeastern parts, the northern and western parts were lagging behind in a rural and agricultural setting. The gap in development continued to widen until the southeastern part became densely populated, while the northern and western areas had sparse residents who relied on farming and making use of agricultural and natural resources. Investors and entrepreneurs migrated to the southeastern region to establish more businesses and grow the healthy economy even further, but the northern and western areas stagnated and slowly slipped back into ancient times. This has had a severe impact on the distribution of population across Minnesota. But that's not the only reason why no one lives in northern and western Minnesota. The geographical setting also has a part to play in it too. Number 3. Geographic landscape isolates northern and western Minnesota. Inside northern and western Minnesota are some of the most beautiful landscapes you'll ever see on the earth. The scenery is naturally satisfying, as it is away from the hustle and bustle of the city areas in southeastern Minnesota. Another thing that makes the view of northern and western Minnesota beautiful is the elevated land and hills planted in the region. While this might look pleasing to the eyes, as it somehow creates a wedge that secures the countless lakes, serene forests, and long expanse of roads, it comes with its drawbacks of isolating the entire northern and western Minnesota from the rest of the state. Not just physical isolation, but also network isolation. In a generation that requires a functioning network to power internet connections, the geographic terrains of this area make it difficult for residents to access a steady network, so they can run businesses that require online operation and also connect with the remaining part of the world over social media. The arrangement of the landscape in an unorthodox layout makes it hard for communication networks to provide reliable and consistent services. The struggle of these network providers affects the everyday connection of residents who make phone calls, internet services, and even emergency responses by hospitals in times of accidents. Healthcare workers are the ones who feel the unstable nature of network services the most, because it limits access to medical facilities that require a great network connection. Anything that affects the medical industry will ultimately affect the people it's meant to cater to. So you see residents of northern and western Minnesota taking trips on long distances to get a stable healthcare service. People leave the area to receive better healthcare and eventually settle when they get a taste of what great medical services and a strong network connection feel like. The geographical landscape also looks like nature is trying to keep the region of northern and western Minnesota apart from their thriving counterpart, southeastern Minnesota. It causes a feeling of being separated from other parts of the state, and this takes a toll on the amount of people who choose to reside in northern and western Minnesota. Not many people want to live in a place that's almost cut off from the rest of the state and the world at large. Inhabitants of northern and western Minnesota are more acquainted with nature as they farm and intermingle with the garden-like region they've found themselves in, living in a slow-paced world of their own, away from the pressure of urban life. Looking through northern and western regions, you'll find roads that stretch for miles unending, surrounded on either side by thick forests and tranquil lakes. Building such roads and maintaining the natural attractions in the region is a daunting task for the inhabitants and local authorities. The long distances that these roads cover make it hard for accident casualties to make their way to healthcare facilities on time. And when winter arrives, it adds another layer of difficulty that makes people avoid settling in northern and western Minnesota. Number 4. The harsh and unforgiving winter climate. Winters are a little extra when you enter the northern and western regions of Minnesota. They are a little more than just seasons like other parts of the world because they deeply influence the lives of the inhabitants living in these areas. Routine decisions, and even something as huge as a long-term decision, are affected by the terrible winter befalling this region. Walking in the plains of northern and western Minnesota during winter, you'll experience temperatures that fall far below the freezing point. This uncomfortable weather condition is enough to drive away anyone who thinks of making a permanent abode in the area. The winter is so harsh that it isn't unusual for the mercury to drop to -30 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, especially in the northernmost regions of Minnesota. Whenever the winter starts, residents of northern and western Minnesota brace themselves up to get chilly up to their bones. Since the weather drops sometimes to below freezing temperatures, it's not much different from living directly in the heart of Antarctica. Most times, as the winter hits the atmosphere, it's accompanied by a large amount of snow that creates a dense white blanket over the landscape. Everywhere is covered with white, and your body goes numb with cold. Why would anyone want to live in a place like this? To make matters worse, this significant volume of snow along with winter can persist for months. During this time, freezing rain, ice, and sometimes rain can take place alongside. Seeing the pictures of this snow is so aesthetic and pleasing to the eyes until you decide to live in the heart of northern Minnesota. This beautiful weather scenery is one of the very reasons why it's challenging to live in these regions, because it affects everything from the ease of transportation to carrying out everyday tasks. Working in a climate condition like this makes things extra difficult. Residents of northern and western Minnesota have to plan their lives around the time of winter and adapt to this extreme weather condition. It'll take 5 times more energy to execute daily activities during the winter period in this area than it does anywhere else in the world. So, most people don't see the need to live here. Nobody wants to make extra preparations and exercise great caution just to perform simple tasks like commuting to work on snow-covered roads. As the days unfold, there'll always be a need to constantly remove snow from the roads and surfaces. Outdoor activities are heavily regulated by winter. Some outdoor sports are created to thrive in the midst of this snowy weather, such as skiing, ice fishing, and snowmobiling. These sports activities make the unpleasant weather conditions a bit enjoyable, so it's not all gloom at the end of the day. Some other people who aren't inclined to sports find the long, cold months really tiring and limiting, and wish it would just be over already. Their outings are severely limited and most times canceled because of the impossible weather conditions. History has it that the native tribes and indigenous settlers in northern and western Minnesota found unique ways to deal with the unforgiving winter conditions. Unlike the modern settlers, these native tribes built homes that were designed to retain heat. In doing this, every member of the family remains warm despite the freezing cold ravaging the atmosphere outside. They not only came up with outstanding ideas for home designs, but they also found ways to gather and preserve food that'll last through the winter months, so they won't have to go out, farm, or work for food during these chilly conditions. They had a keen understanding of the times and seasons, and they used that knowledge to plan their lifestyle around the rhythm of the environment. Meteorological studies reveal that the Ojibwe, Dakota, and other tribes lived in ancient Minnesota from the 1600s to the 1850s, when the weather was colder and wetter than it is now. The studies referred to that period as Minnesota's own ice age. Sharon Day, the executive director of the Indigenous People Task Force, who is currently 67 years old, remembers the stories her grandparents living in the houses on the Bois Forte Reservation, close to International Falls, told her when she was a little girl. She recalled one of the stories that said that during winter, the families migrated to western Minnesota because there were more trees to shield the houses from the fierce waves of the wind. During spring, she was told that most people migrated to areas with maple trees so they could harvest sap for syrup and sugar. As for summer, it was easily spent by the lake. Describing how the indigenous people kept warm during the harsh winter conditions, Sharon explained that their houses were made out of birch bark, which never molds. She then went on to say that a pit would be built in the middle of the floor with rocks buried underneath the floor. When the rocks were heated, they would radiate warmth. The houses were usually constructed with trees that were natural to their state, trees that grew in the region where they were about to build a house. Sharpened logs were mounted on the ground. Then they were bent and tied in a manner similar to a basket turned upside down. The framework was wrapped and covered with sheets of bark. Animal skins were plastered over the door as a covering, and not just on the door, but on the chimney hole on the roof as well. To protect themselves against all forms of cold, sun, and insects, both men and women greased themselves with animal fat and oil for protection. Pole wigwams in the form of teepees were a common sight, as they were also constructed to help them fight the weather. It was said that the Athabascan Indians of Alaska were renowned for making it out of -50 temperatures by wearing caribou fur. This caribou fur has doubly insulated fiber shreds that are hollow, making it shed water and snow. This was revealed by the Alaskan Native Knowledge Network at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. One other way the native tribes prepared in advance for harsh storms was to forecast them. In their tribes, there were usually 2 or more elders who were graced to forecast the weather by reading elements of nature. A breeze pushing clouds from the north meant that a blizzard was just around the corner. A select few men of the tribes were especially gifted in interpreting the actions of nature and giving their meanings to the humans in their tribes. Some other signs these men observed was that if woodpeckers shared one tree or one nest, then it meant that an unforgiving winter was on its way. Since the winter was on its way, preparations would be intensified to live through this harsh period of cold. The natives regarded the cold as a living thing that deserved their respect. Times have changed, however, and modern Americans are unwilling to put up with these adverse weather conditions in the region. Plus, the economic and agricultural landscape also influences their decision to stay away from northern and western Minnesota. Number 5. Settlers uninterested in the agricultural environment. Northern and western Minnesota is blessed with a rich agricultural heritage. In most places you look, the green vegetation adds a certain color to its beauty and aesthetics. Since this area of the state has a comparative advantage in agriculture, it's only natural that most of the settlers tilt towards farming and mining to make a living. This doesn't appeal to the foreign settlers trooping into the area to set up commercial businesses and industries, generally engaging in an advanced level of buying and selling. Their dreams of building an industrial corporation, sole proprietorship business, and limited liability companies don't fit into the setting of northern and western Minnesota that's driven by natural resources. Timber and mining are the best businesses that the environment supports, aside from farming. The landscape of northern and western Minnesota rewards those who take time to harness the rich natural resources of its soil. Alternatively, immigrant settlers can choose to work in the timber and mining industries as employees if they want to get a feel of blue and white-collar jobs. These employment positions are often subjected to environmental regulations and fluctuating market demands, making them slightly unreliable as a main source of income. These kinds of jobs, though they are relatively many, aren't as diversified as what you'll find in the southeastern parts of Minnesota, where urban living is thriving and commercial businesses are booming. Since northern and western Minnesota's limited economy, which is based on farming and mining, is nowhere compared to the bustling city center in other urban parts of the state. People avoid living in northern and western Minnesota. It's so much easier to go to where the most action is happening. Western Minnesota in particular is so hung up on agriculture. The large expanse of open fields screams farming to a first-time visitor. Everything is naturally set up so residents can make the most living out of planting and harvesting. With the introduction of modern agriculture to the scene, it means that fewer people are needed to till the land. Modern agriculture significantly cuts down on job opportunities for those who want to work on the farm, because they've already been replaced by tireless and efficient machines. Everything about the modern agricultural disposition in the environment drives people away from settling. Despite this, who would have thought that the social traditions also contributed to why no one lives in northern and western Minnesota? Number 6. Individuals does not want communal living. The region of northern and western Minnesota is in the midst of a rich blend of cultures and traditions. These cultures place a huge premium on community living. The reason for this underlying sense of community in these areas is that the entire region is made of small towns that are grouped together. These rural towns are so close together that everyone knows their neighbor, forging deep community ties in the process. From one town to another, however, is a large distance that separates them, so each town only has nearby neighbors to build friendships and strong relationships with. The separation of towns from each other can create a sense of isolation for residents, because they seem out of touch with the rest of the world. Compared to urban areas where everyone is jam-packed together and thrown in the midst of never-ending commercial parties, social interactions seem sparse in northern and western Minnesota. People who love to lead a quiet life can appreciate it for its tranquility, but those kinds of people are in the far minority. The majority of incoming settlers want to be in the heart of commerce and plant businesses they can nurture for the rest of their lives. They also want to be very close and interconnected with the rest of the world. While close community bonds may provide a deep sense of emotional security and sense of belonging, the majority of people crave the constant buzz, thrill, and business opportunities that city life offers. To make it worse, the dwellers of northern and western Minnesota have no plans in the distant future to embrace the fast-paced urban life found in southeastern Minnesota and other regions. A part of this decision is the heritage they got from their indigenous tribes who farmed the lush plains of western Minnesota or mined the forests of northern Minnesota. These indigenes of the land kept their community-centric traditions of festivals and local arts to celebrate their heritage and adaptation to the environment. Whenever these practices are held in modern times, the residents are reminded of who they are, and outsiders reconfirm the sharp difference between urban life and the slower-paced rural living in northern and western Minnesota, which places emphasis on community. That's another reason nobody lives in this area. The state of amenities in northern and western Minnesota is also another consideration for why people have reservations about settling in this region. Number 7. Urban facilities depopulates northern and western Minnesota. Weighing the benefits and drawbacks between rural and urban amenities suddenly puts everything in perspective, as it lets people who had plans to settle in rural northern and western Minnesota second-guess their proposed action. In turn, this helps in making an uneven distribution between the number of people who chose to live in northern and western Minnesota and those who chose to live in more urban regions. The northern and western parts of Minnesota have always been known for their tranquility and serene environment because it's more rural and highlights its advantage of nature. This comes with drawbacks because the amenities allocated to this region are not as compared to those allocated to areas where the hustle and bustle of the city reigns supreme. The beauty of living in urban areas is the abundance of amenities and conveniences that improve the quality of life by several degrees. Unlike the rural regions, the city center boasts diverse entertainment avenues, great dining options, and a wide pool of professional services. Living in urban areas grants you access to more educational and healthcare systems, and the standard of dishing out these services cannot be compared to what's obtained in rural areas. All of these amenities are critical factors most people consider before refusing to live in northern and western Minnesota. These quality amenities are not likely to be found in such rural settings, but in urban areas such as southeastern Minnesota. Moving and settling right in the areas where they are found makes life more convenient. Urban amenities provide a rich quality of life as a replacement for the community and tranquility found in rural regions. While these things are responsible for driving a large number of people away from northern and western Minnesota, most people forget the special appeal that rural amenities found in these sparsely populated regions possess. Rural amenities found in these areas are more about enhancing the quality of life connected to nature. Using these amenities brings you home to your roots and makes you one with nature. Some of the amenities found in northern and western Minnesota include hiking, hunting, and fishing. These amenities also promote interconnectedness with other people, as a sense of community is easily forged when making use of them. The environment is less crowded and quieter than the noise associated with the city center, but it also doesn't satisfy the taste of the majority, such as having entertainment outlets, impressive dining options, and shopping malls. Thanks for watching to discover why nobody lives in northern and western Minnesota. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting video content.